Chronic fatigue hit in its fullest extent after a month of stressful overextension and diesel fumes on a construction site. And it was trying to please, trying to get more done than I thought, or more done. There was a critical client in my landscape business, and I really wanted to lift that veil of criticism. And so I was trying to do more and do more, so that rather than looking at me with disbelief, they looked at me, as someone who believed me. And so I worked really hard, long hours, and I rented a tractor that had a muffler about 4 feet in front of me, and it was an old diesel motor. And so there was just too much of that going in my lungs with hard work and stress. And there was also some heat. And so halfway through the job, I found myself in bed having a very difficult time both getting out, but also wanting to get out. Now, there was still the underlying anxiety, like I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. But there wasn't, or that client's going to be angry, but there wasn't actually a joy in anything. And there was just, a dull void, mentally, emotionally, physically. Now, as I look back, taking that time apart is probably one of the most intelligent things that I could do. In other words, to slow down, to stop feeding that energy, to stop trying to be good enough, and just to pause that particular set of loops. And so I could say that in some way the time in bed was a healing time and a healing response in my body. However, on a mental level, I felt like there's no way to win because there was rented equipment sitting in the garden, and I couldn't operate it. And I felt this kind of deep sense of, just panic, like I can't be enough. And yet, I think another part of me was saying just being is enough, and to come back into the stillness. So there I was, laying in bed and feeling embarrassed about, as the days went by, feeling embarrassed about what to tell the client. Because when I went back there was a part of me that said I need to work more than ever to catch up for this embarrassing slowdown. And I remember that the machine that I had rented, it was a mini excavator and a tractor. And the machine that I had rented was cheaper if rented weekly. And so I felt this big, obligation that if, that the client wasn't getting their full discount, that if I hadn't been sick, the client would be able to get a bigger discount because they were paying me hourly and they were paying the cost of the machinery. And so, I talked with, with the male who was the kind of the cynic on the job, and and just said, I'm not quite sure what to do. I can't really move out of bed. The machine is sitting there. I don't know whether to send it back because, this is, I'm not quite sure what's happening. And they weren't particularly bad about it. I don't, meaning they weren't particularly critical, but the whole thing was very stressful for my sense of what it was to be a good professional, and and falling behind there. Now, as I was laying in bed, certainly making the call helped to release things. Was I going to get better? I didn't really know. Talking things through with the client was a good step to just include them in what I was going through. Secondly, including the machine. Like, I don't know, you're not getting your full rental in the machine. On the other hand, I'm not making any money on that machine. I'm just charging it for whatever it is. So if I lose money to save you money so that your machine rental doesn't, go out, but I don't want you to be unhappy, is, I guess, one of the deeper anxieties. And this stems from the early childhood trauma, meaning there's very young ages, in this case maybe around 6 years old, trying to be good enough and not being able to secure a safe, healthy, loving bond with either parents, feeling like the black sheep, feeling like the bad one, wanting desperately to be the good one, feeling like the bad one. And please don't put me on the outside. Please don't, look at me with disappointment, etc. And so that's going on at 6 years old. And then it's coming into, what was I, probably 22, 23, something like that. And the client, of course, not being prepared or sensitive to deal with that in our culture. And so that was the first wave of chronic fatigue. And another, there were several other, waves. But I lost 60% or more of my energy for a period of years after that. And I've never received all of that energy back, where there's a sense of grief. There's a sense of loss and of grief of where that life might have gone, without this sense of repeating, anxious looping with a client that couldn't answer that loop. Because that's the sadness of the 6-year-old with a father who can't answer that loop, with a mother who is oblivious of that loop, with a client who can't answer that loop. Our default definition of adulthood is often the grown-uphood of our parents. And so I think that client just learned that to be a man, you had to be stern and critical. And so he was just trying to be a man in a culture that, doesn't really explain what an adult is, other than copying certain things, paying a mortgage or something like that. So I'm laying in bed, and everything I do exhausts me. There's just so much grief, and I've learned about success with a positive mental attitude. That was a book I read by Norman Vincent Peale and W. Clement Stone. Interestingly, one of Trump's mentors. And I think it was Norman Vincent Peale was Trump's mentor. And there's just about everything that I think and everything that I do costs me more energy than it gives me. And the teaching aspect, or the disciplined aspect of this situation, in which doing the normal me thing was exhausting, in which I didn't know how to process the grief of childhood, the trauma of childhood, was that I had to discover where joy was. And I found it in a crystal. I think in the crystal thing, I shared, this little crystal here. This is a citrine quartz point. And you might just barely be able to get a little bit of a sense of the rainbows in a crystal. But I had a crystal about this size. And the one time in the day where I felt like I was receiving more energy than I was giving was when I was looking into what's called a rainbow message plate in crystal terminology. A rainbow message plate was, when I was looking in and I was seeing this rainbow on this. You can see it right in here, this kind of refracting plate. And that brought me joy. So I just spent hours in the day looking at the rainbow in the crystal. And this began a shift away from trying to be good enough by growing a company, by making more money, by doing things faster and more efficiently. Because what I was so afraid of was the internalized critic embodied in this client, embodied in the unaffectionate parent. That the withholding of present love and affection, the withholding of presence, the withholding of emotional connection with both parents was giving the child, the traumatized child in me, the message, you're not lovable, you're not good enough. And so what do? You have to look around in the culture to what is lovable, and it's making more money or doing this, or can I please you in this way? Can I please you in that way? And all of these things took energy. And in our culture, where deep, loving affection is taboo, you can do affected versions of it. The dramatization of oh, nice to see you. But it's actually very interesting if you analyze the affectation. What's going on is there's an authentic set of feelings that are taboo. Then there's a fear of being caught in the authentic feelings. Then there is a synthetic persona that is tested and flown in the cult environment in order to see who will like it. And does it survive the various buffets and things? And then if it is successful, then that persona is curated and affected. It's designed. But you have the energy spent in the suppression of the authentic feelings, and then you have the energy spent testing, you have the energy in the fear of being caught, and you have the further energy in the affect, in I'm going to say like this because this is the current acceptable thing to say. And, so at any generation in every culture, you have certain personas that are untouchable, where nobody gets to say, that's a shitty, crappy, affected persona, cut it out. Because it's cool. Well, just saying the word cool. I mean, you look at it rationally, you have empathy, warmth, you have sociopathic, cold. Well, in a culture that abuses people in their trauma, you want to be in the sociopathic point in the continuum because you have no feelings as you are hurt. This is often the migration of a child out of an abuse cycle with the parent, where the abuse often stops when the child stops crying when they're being beaten, humiliated, stops showing any symptoms of the abuse, and moves into a sociopathic state where they don't care. And if they take it to the extreme, the child may cut themselves, may break things. I don't care. Now, once the child embodies the sociopathic state of the surrounding environment, then the parents or the environment gets a little bit more worked up. Why don't you care? Why don't you care? And so now the feelings go back to the culture that generated them. But you look at, why is being cool considered desirable? Why is being invisible considered desirable? And of course, different strategies work in different cultural environments. But that had to fall away because the grief load made the combination of suppressing all that grief and failing to feed the essential self and desiring to develop an affected persona while ignoring, large probability fields within the psyche and persona that would generate energy and that would be more authentic, consumed, 80% of my energy. And then the anxiety of being caught and being punished also consumed, 40% of that energy. And so it's just exhausting. And so I think that the message in a rainbow, the simple moment, the simple joy, that which is being willfully avoided with incredible attention to detail in a cult that will not respond to what is, to respond to what's most there within the self. We don't want to hear your trauma. We don't want to hear your grief. We don't want to hear that men have feelings. We don't want to hear anything real. We want to critically say, okay, you're kind of good enough if you grind yourself, into dust for fulfilling a cultural role. And what my body was saying is, we're not going to give you more funds to blow on that bankrupt cultural model. We're not going to give it to you. No. If that's the life you're going to do with all this energy, lay in bed. And so my mind, be efficient, achieve more goals, make more money, do this, satisfy this, get this job, get a thing, get a bit more. My mind, had to accept that if I wanted to, that the only way to get out of bed was to do things that were halfway joyful. And that was nothing to do with anything that I was doing with all that nervous, fear-based energy. I needed to find something joyful to do. And the clue, was in, the rainbow of a crystal, that being the highlight. It's like, well, what else is there? Maybe cooking an amazing dish, or going outside and looking out the door, or, being present. And the fear, like, what do I do? What do I do? Remained. But that influence of exhaustion and awareness, that it was so miserable to burn in, to go into physical debt, I would call it, chronic bankruptcy on a physical, psychic level in order to live that life, became just too painful. And so to some extent, looking at addictions at that point, whether it was sugar or numbing out or, just a sense of blocking that pain. But also the question, where would my life go? Where would my life go in a direction that was beautiful, that was nourishing, that was satisfying. And the crisis in this terrain comes when the underlying authenticity is so filled with trauma, with grief, with overwhelm, with I don't know how to deal with this. I don't have the emotional regulating skills to be present for the feelings that no human being has been present for me feeling. When not a single grown-up in the teaching, therapeutic, cultural, parental community is present for feelings that I don't see being modeled around me, how can I let go of the safe, the one safe promise to the child is if you will be a responsible grown-up and make money and fit into the cult archetype of the, boring, sexually depraved, unemotional guy who likes to watch football and makes lots of money and moves things around with a lunky body and eats too much. What is that archetype? If you do that, you'll at least feel a sense of belonging, even if there's no emotional connection. And yet there was a hunger. There was a desire for something else, a pulling. And yet, if I let go of that archetype, where do I go? Where do I find a version and a vision of being me that is not completely isolated, alone, and left dealing with those terrible feelings that have been given to me, but that have not been provided, a way out, a way to acknowledge, honor, and digest them.